Hey guys, Dr. Minardi here, bringing you all things STEM. From my journey to yours, we are on an adventure together. Today, we have the immense fortune and pleasure of hosting Shaundra Toy. Let's welcome to the stage, Shaundra. Hey Shaundra, how
Hello.
are you?
Great. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited to have you and have this conversation. It's gonna be great.
Yes.
Um, Shaundra Toy is currently working as a solution engineer for Clari, a company working with AI in the sales process. Previously, she worked with Groove, a sales enablement solution built on Salesforce, and previous to that, as a solution engineer at Salesforce Service Cloud, working with high tech strategic accounts. Prior to jumping into tech, she also had a career in the print industry where she worked for Screen, Pantone, Kodak, and Creo, developing professional services for color and automation and global brand initiatives for clients like P&G, Target, 3M, and Colgate-Palmolive. Toy is PMP certified, double certified in change management, holds a certificate in UX research, a certificate in human-centered strategy, has mentored new project managers, taught many advanced seminars for the Project Management Institute, or PMI, and recently finished a minor in user experience research along with her bachelor's degree in multidisciplinary studies and integrative problem solving. Toy has combined years of certifications in leadership and communications with experience in project management to speak on topics such as thinking in systems, innovative problem solving, and building momentum for change. Inspired by the complexity of systems and their flow, Shaundra Toy's 2021 TED Talk, Catching the Wave of Organizational Change, explores the who, why, how, and what of organizational change, which and when strategically implemented together can produce a rapid change initiative that is highly successful, less painful, and more fiscally responsible. So that's so exciting. You've done such a tremendous amount of not only work, but I think research too, that I'm just really, really just excited for this conversation. So beyond your bio, tell us a little bit more about Shaundra.
Ah, gosh. I think the easiest way to describe me is I had this wonderful interview question once, and they said, pick 3 words to describe yourself, which I thought, wow, how do you boil that down? I boiled it down to 3 things. I'm very curious about everything. And if you were to look at my bookshelf, you would see subjects that are pretty broad ranging. I also am pretty adventurous, whether that's, physically adventurous in terms of skydiving or camping and hiking in, the Sierras, or, if it's just testing out new things with software too. And I think the third word is helpful. I really enjoy helping people, whether it's our internal teams or whether it's our customers. There's something really satisfying about seeing other people succeed for me too. So I'd say those are my top 3, and that's kind of a little bit about me. I could go into a little bit more detail on different projects and things like that too. But everything from academic interest, which I can't wait to get into that with you because I know that your background comes from academia, and I have bounced all over the map with my academic career. And then personally, we've done renovations too. Like, we're really just not afraid to dive into whatever. I think we've had renovations going for the last 10 years in some form or fashion on 3 different houses, actually. So kind of like slow motion flippers too. So we like a lot of DIY projects, and our latest one is we put a pool in and did the general contract work ourselves for it. So I think, whenever you're dealing with engineering and solutioning, you really kind of have to be that type of curious and a little bit more adventurous to tackle projects that most people would be like scared to dive into.
Well, it's absolutely daunting, right? I mean, if you think about it, not just flipping through a career and changing your career path, but then
Yeah.
also taking on things that you have, I don't know, not necessarily an academic background, right?
Oh, exactly. Exactly. But it's amazing, the older I get, and like I said, I did about 30 years in the printing industry before I switched to tech. there's so much that crosses over. Like, I'm looking at my list of academic background, and you're going to enjoy this. So I started out as a criminal justice major. I ended up going into a fine arts major after that. From there, I went to philosophy and computer science. I remember my dad asked me, when are you going to graduate? And I said, I don't know. It's not a means to an end, right? I'm enjoying the learning. So it was fine for me. Where I did end up at that point taking a break from education, though, was when I was doing my philosophy degree, and I thought, well, I don't really want to teach, which ironically I love teaching, but you know, I thought, well, what am I going to do with the philosophy degree? And so I had decided to do like a double major with computer science, and then I was so far behind on the math. And there's a little bit of story in the math background that is interesting from a STEM perspective, because I was doing great, school wise, chugging along, and then all of a sudden I hit pre-algebra and it was a brick wall. And my dad was an engineer, mom was a teacher. My mom didn't have that math background. My dad could do it in his head, which really wasn't helpful, because he would skip steps, and I'd be like, I don't know what you just did, and I had a really big struggle with this one teacher when I hit ninth grade, and I had a math phobia, which that's the one thing, gosh, going back, that I wish I could have changed, because there was so much that was related to math later on in my journey. But so I took a break when I did my computer science, and the big reason I took the break was because the computer science department said, oh, when you graduate, you should expect to make X amount. And I'm like, well, I'm already making that in the print industry. And at that time, I was getting probably just as much, if not better, exposure to equipment and programs on the job than I was if I were to back up, take all those math prerequisites, and then get into the computer science arena. So I sort of dropped out and took a job down in San Diego, where I had to drive 80 miles one way to work. But the beautiful thing was I got to basically start my own digital department in print. And as digital came on board, print became more and more about digitizing things, and we started to see PDFs instead of photographs, that you had to go and put on a big expensive scanner. So that was an interesting break, and I'm glad I did it, because when I came back to school later on, I had a lot more context, and it made all of the education a little bit more rich and more deep. And so as I then went back to school later on, I did part of a business degree, and then I shifted gears to project management. I did a PMP certification, which that was no small task. And then I did a couple of certifications in change management. Somewhere along that journey between along the PMP, when I was doing the project management, though, I did go back and at work, I had shifted gears out of sales, and I was working with professional services, and that was also very fascinating from the standpoint of how project management worked with professional services, how change management worked with then also getting people through that change of whatever you were trying to implement, and that those things were really, really beneficial for me. Yeah.
But I think it's if I could synthesize everything that you're saying, is that there's a couple of thematic statements, but one of the big thematic statements is your path does not have to necessarily be linear, and that it is the attributes by which you are developing along that path, which then help you,
Mm-hmm.
I think, through your journey, right?
Oh, 100%. And it's interesting. My kids always had this linear perception of, I go to school and then I get a job. I'm like, no. They're concurrent paths, and you can do them at the same time, and they make each one better, because you're learning more about, how best practices, or you're learning about systems in school, but then you're seeing how they get applied in the real world, getting that, work experience. So I always have believed that they're concurrent tracks that need to kind of bounce off of each other. And I think there's a better ROI in your education that way too. that's something that's like a big hot button for me, especially having three, young children, four actually, that have, moved through the system. I have a stepson, and the expectation that's set for kids that they have to, go to some Ivy League school, and that's great if they can get in, but the cost and the student loan debt that's there. I'm a strong, I mean, we build ROI cases all the time as a sales engineer, and when we're solutioning and trying to get our system installed and implemented. And I think very similar, there should be ROI applied to education, right? It's one thing if you're taking on a lot of student debt and you're expecting a lot of income, but that doesn't really jive when you're, not a doctor or a lawyer, for example. So it's a challenge, I think, to set those right expectations and know, when's the best time to go back and, apply more academic rigor.
Well, or even do it in the first place too. And what I'm becoming cognizant of is that parents don't necessarily want their kids to do all 4 years in undergrad. They want to have an accelerated AA program, which is introduced in high school. So then when you go directly into college, you're either doing, your final 2 years or your final
Mhm.
3 years. And then that way it decreases the cost. But to what detriment? I think college is a place where, I mean, you not only learn about things that are just taught to you semantically through, philosophy classes or whatnot, but it's also the point of collaborating with other students, getting introduced in, interactives and collaboration and
Mhm.
how do you project manage with people who don't have the same background with you, whose brain doesn't work the same way, and they don't problem solve the same way as you? And that is not an opportunity that's afforded to many if you shorten that time frame of your
Mhm.
college institutions.
Yeah. Yeah, this is true. This is true. And again, just getting that experience of working in groups and teams. I mean, we all love those group projects that they're challenging, right? And that's, the same thing that you're going to bump into in a work environment as well, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that what I was so intrigued with your background too is change management and how change management is that interpersonal sort of application. It's content driven, but at the same time, it's very interpersonal and
Mhm.
collegial and collaborative, and it's highly dependent on the culture of the environment by which you're speaking
Right.
of. So I wanted to circle back, I think, to your academic pathway because I think that is a key theme that I would like to center on, at least for a moment, is that it wasn't linear and that
No.
what was sort of you mentioned criminal justice, you mentioned philosophy, fine arts, computer science, mathematics. What was that central thread of what were you looking for?
Ah, well, philosophy is really the one that's near and dear to my heart. I think that, how do you monetize a philosophy degree is the challenge, right? But, I mean, it does have a lot of overlap in a number of different areas. I mean, ethics, I mean, we could use a few people with ethics today, and especially in tech with where things are going with AI, right? Which is another thing I love to talk about too. When I did my minor, I finally finished my bachelor's degree, by the way, in 2022. And that was in that integrative problem solving. And that was a really great program because it gave a lot of different ways to look at problems, to try to expand the lens, try to pull in the golden nuggets that really make a solution work well. And that's applicable in every field, right? So pulling those things together, and I love looking at philosophy. I love looking at process. Um, I like the human aspect of it too. So when I did my minor in user experience research, I mean, this was the really ironic part, is that user experience research was in anthropology. It was old school user experience research, not the UI, design part that's so, exciting and sexy for everybody now. It was the research side of things. And what really just blew my mind as I was going through that program, especially as, we were studying some of the AI developments that were coming along at the same time, is that we don't have nearly enough information to reflect accurately what's going on in the human experience. And, how do you take qualitative data and turn it into a quantitative thing that you can measure to feed a model? And then there's the bigger question, the philosophical, ethical question of, is our past history a really good thing to replicate? We have, as a human existence, not exactly been really perfect, in terms of what we'd like to see in the future. I mean, we've tons of history of genocide and other atrocities like that, we don't really want to replicate as we move forward in this world. So I think there needs to be more attention on those other integrative subjects that pull together towards an end that actually benefits humanity a little bit more, rather than just do it because it's, oh my gosh, we can do this, it's so cool. Look at, can we versus should we, and some of these things too. So I think, they all kind of pull together. in the end it was all over the map, and it was not a linear course, and it certainly wasn't, it just happened as as I felt the pull to go back to school and study more. But all of them in conjunction, like looking back, like really feed into where I'm at today.
I love the idea around UX research, especially in tech, because it is such an enablement right now, but generationally, there's such a wide gap of those who are very familiar, who like the platform as a service play, how do you actually get subscription sort of services, how do you expand that chat GPT, all of that, all the way to, I mean, the boomers. And then how do you introduce them, and how do they, and what is fascinating for me, especially in my area and where my, full-time job is in healthcare, around, you have this generational gap,
You
and
do.
then to overlay that in healthcare, where the folks who are getting older and older are so used to going to their primary care for full service 90-minute appointments, and that is not
Yeah.
what healthcare is. And healthcare now, with the health tech boom, is turning so e-commerce driven. And
Yeah.
so now you're inserting e-commerce principles to it. So the UX researcher has a really challenging time ahead for them, because they're interlacing everything that you were saying: philosophy, criminal justice, ethics, e-commerce principles. Like, those are what exactly, to your point. And everything is becoming now such a small world, and everything is
Right.
so interrelated. You can't just do a
Mm.
linear path in academia and expect to have, a
All of those
job that is
pieces to the
just
puzzle. Yeah.
very siloed, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And that's, I think, if there was one theme overall, like, and it was funny, I was talking to somebody on Monday night, like, what do you want to do? And like, I tend to gravitate towards roles where I'm the glue between the silos. And that integrative approach is super important. Connecting dots between different groups or people or implications, customer journeys, right? And I think, that's such a strong point about user experience and the elderly population. You go to, renew a prescription, and probably there's an app for that, but I've got elderly family members that aren't necessarily really savvy with their own cell phone technology. So does that mean they're cut off from healthcare or other types of communication as a result? I mean, there are some serious implications there if they don't have access, because we haven't thought through the user experience enough to make sure that it's so easy to discover. And when you don't have discoverability factored in, and different types of populations being represented in that user experience, and it does make a big difference in the end result. Yeah.
I also want to talk a little bit about your reference to a math phobia,
Oh
um,
gosh.
and talking not necessarily the math phobia, but
Yeah.
it's really interesting because um, when I took macroeconomics, I was just not understanding it. And a light bulb
Mhm.
finally went off. And I said, oh, if I just incorporate mathematical principles as to why, just use equation-based algorithms to understand what is actually happening, all it is math. That's all it
Mhm.
was. And I would almost say the same thing for organic chemistry, which is very visual, very 3D, but very
Yeah.
similar in the fact that it was very A plus B equals C and C plus D equals E. And then, go through. And so there's something to be said about not actually maybe harnessing the actual material at that point in time, but using
Mhm.
basic principles and understanding to move forward.
Oh, 100%. Well, so yeah, my math phobia was really like a brick right in the forehead because I was doing great in all of my studies until then, and then, geez, my very first D, and I was crushed, right? Like it was at a time in my life too. You're just a freshman in high school where, it's your whole like it just I my self esteem was just in the toilet. So I gave up on math, and I think a lot of the frustration around it was that I didn't understand what it was doing, right? If there had been, and I know that this is going to make a lot of people crazy because most people hate word problems, but I needed the context of the word problem. Like, what am I trying to solve? Why does this matter? Why do I care? That sort of stuff really, really, I think helps um, for some learners probably put it into a better space. But I, you know, I don't particularly love math now. Like the phobia is still there. I still count on my fingers when I add. I love Excel because ooh, calculator, right? But I grasp like on a visual um, concept level a lot of the same principles that are in calculus and in trigonometry and in three-dimensional geometry. Like these are not difficult things for me to visualize and understand. It's just putting the math to it that really, and I think if I'd had that context, it would have made a world of difference. It really would have. Yeah. And not skipping
That's how my
steps yet.
friend got through calculus-based physics. It was so funny because he said, I don't know what the professor is teaching, physics specific. I just turn everything into a partial derivative sort of mathematical equation and I get the right answer. So in that fact, it works. And I was like, oh, well, I wish I took that class prior to taking.
Oh,
um,
God.
so I want to talk a little bit about your transition. So you transitioned
Yes.
from printing to tech. And what was that driving force? What was that
Mhm.
decision point? What were the skills? Because I'm sure there were more than one that you leveraged in printing that then you moved over into tech. Because I think a lot of people think that jumping in from, it's really, let me back up a little bit. It's really interesting for me to have conversations with individuals when they're talking about, general engineering, because you can talk about engineering and then you can talk about industry agnostic principles that you still use in any sort of form or facet.
Mhm.
But then you have to be potentially a SME in that industry as well. But
Yeah.
that's a skill that's developed over time. And so that's
Mhm.
what I'm trying to understand from your perspective.
Yeah. And that's a really good point because I was terrified of jumping. I thought, "Oh, I'm gonna have to start at the bottom again. It's not gonna be pretty. I don't know if I can afford that." I mean, there were all these fears that went through my head. So in the end, the skills that were really transferable were all of the same things like project management, professional services, change management, all of those were transferable. The things that made me more comfortable with it though is in the print industry. We're working with a lot of data sets, primarily towards marketing, right? And when we're working with those data sets and then also looking at how we tweak color, for example, color, by the way, was my big thing when I was in the print industry. I taught color theory. I worked for Pantone. We did global brand programs where we like rolled out entire print quality programs globally. It was just a lot of fun, but I also had to understand deeply like how color worked. Understanding color management was all math, right? And so that's where I took the farthest lane away from math, looking at art, went to graphic arts, and then came back to math through color. And so that was very transferable. All of those calculations, though, and a lot of the systems that run big printing equipment are all very computer based. And so I had deep computer skills from that part of things. We had to, in the early days, I'm going to date myself here, had to hack a lot of PostScript and get it to work. And so I was comfortable diving into a Perl script or PostScript, and either one of them, and changing up some code here and there when we were stuck trying to get a file to print. So those were all very transferable. But I think the key thing specific to Salesforce and making that jump over to Salesforce was that I was also in my project management work using Salesforce through our internal admin to help facilitate how we were going to move this big global organization and actually supply chain onto this new print program. We had to figure out how to first identify that they had received the information. We then had to create a lead in the system and follow up with them. And then we also had to look at the package that they needed to adhere to the program and confirm that they were sold that package and enabled on it. And so all of those we did through Salesforce with our admin. So, and I had to do all the reporting through Salesforce. So just the practice of engaging with my internal team and understanding how that system works and having to do all those reports meant that when I moved over to Salesforce, I had at least a little bit of background in what the systems could do, how to configure them, how to build some reporting and get some information out of them. And that definitely helped. And, Salesforce was great. I really enjoyed working there, and I enjoyed that, they have all those free trailheads that are available. So I think that was also a big piece of it too. But, it certainly wasn't without a little bit of work to make it happen, but there was a lot that crossed over. Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And I think that's very helpful. I think when individuals are thinking about, transitioning from one industry to another, even maybe without a background, and what are the tools, tips, and tricks. So I do want to talk though about your current role and, give us a life in the day of Shaundra as to what it means to be a solution engineer.
Yeah, so solution engineer is a little bit different because we're working with our sales team and we're working with customers. So a good chunk of the day is spent in discovery. We're, sitting down with customers, understanding their environment, what their goals and objectives are, understanding their tech stack, and looking at how do we understand their journey, where they're at, and then look at our feature set to see if there's a good fit. So a good chunk is discovery. The next chunk is really in then turning that around, and we configure our demo org to mirror their scenario and then demonstrate it to them so that they can see it in our own solution. So this is how you did it before. Here's the hero's journey. Here's how we're going to be able to do it in the future and make you look like a rock star. So crafting that story selling, crafting the demo support tools to do that as well. And then there's the background stuff, right? We have to do a little bit of testing here and there to make sure that some of the new features or the way that somebody wants to use something is going to work adequately. And then the very unsexy part of it, which is answering RFP questions. So, they'll have a request for information or a request for proposal, and there's usually a very long list. You'll see my eyes go crossed, right? Of questions that we have to answer. So I work a lot with our team to make sure that our answer database is up to date and that sort of thing. And then there's a deeper dive on that's more focused on information security. And so we'll also answer questionnaires for that too, and make sure that our InfoSec people can get involved if they need to dive even deeper and explain, permission sets and things of that nature. So that's my day in the life. And so the teams that I generally will interact with throughout that are going to be like our account executives, our sales reps, obviously our customers. Those are my favorites to interact with. And then our broader internal teams. I always want to try to, as much as I can, when we're moving a customer through that journey, trying to make sure that there's good, clean handoffs to our implementation team and that we're setting them up for success. And hopefully getting a really good customer experience throughout that journey too. So, yeah.
And then what about customer success?
Customer success is a whole different group within our organization, right? So we broke it down so that there is the engineering team, the sales engineering team that works up front pre-sales to set expectations correctly, and also pull in any kind of roadmap stuff. But then after somebody decides to move forward with some partner, then there's an implementation team that will get them up and running. And then they're assigned a customer success manager and account manager. So there's hand holding throughout the entire process and making sure that they're able to hit some of those metrics as they progress and start to populate the data. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That was actually going to answer my next question with respect to, you said you are the glue to the team, which I can totally appreciate, but the glue to what teams, cross-functionally?
Yeah, cross-functionally, here's the thing. I find that shifts with the day. The day. Here's an example, right? We were in the middle of a big. We have a help center. Our help articles are all online, and we were about to move them over into a new knowledge base. So working with that team to make sure that the right articles were getting moved over and that were made public, and that the templates that we're sharing for example, a POC, that link to all of those are then updated. The marketing materials get updated, that sort of thing. So, we'll often work across teams like that to go, hey, yeah, I know you're doing the migration, but there's all of these other people and stakeholders that we need to factor in. And so trying to kind of, again, connect those dots and pull the team together a little bit more. But regardless of whether it's, that project or the RFP database where we're, populating all those answers in there and trying to get them updated, there's a lot of different teams that collaborate for that, whether it's product development or InfoSec or, some of our product managers, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think that's one of my magic skills, honestly, is the connect the dots and glue the silos together, because I generally try not to let stuff like that fall through the cracks when I see a gap.
Well, that's where your change management experience comes to play, for sure,
Mm-hmm.
especially with bringing all of that interdisciplinary folks across the organization to then deliver for a customer. I think that also speaks to skills that are not necessarily trained, but that are earned over time and developed over time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of communications. It's funny. I took a ton of communications classes just as electives throughout that should actually be one of my other major changes, because I did do a whole, it wasn't really academics per se, but it was a lot of Toastmasters, a lot of just communications courses and things like that too, that helped when I was getting ready for the TED Talk. And that, yeah, I can't underscore communication skills enough in terms of whether it's your own internal team, customers, everybody. It's a skill for sure, learning how to communicate well. So
yeah, and how it changes with different audiences too, and how
100%, yeah.
how you convey that information differently.
Yeah.
I know, especially for me, actually talking to my fellow product managers and then talking to customers who are clinicians. I mean, the words that I use are not too different, but I will say they are, less jargony, less
Yeah.
acronym, but also then, you got to know your industry then, which is also part of that sort of, I think, hesitation with people jumping from industry to industry.
Mm-hmm.
Basic principles are still there, but the jargon by which you use in order to facilitate the
Yes.
communication is different.
100%. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. And that's a lot of the reason why we customize our demos too, just to make sure that it's using the same sorts of language and things like that. Exactly. But when it resonates and it lands a little bit better when it feels familiar, right? It's our confirmation bias. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're nearing the time of our podcast, but I do want to give you the opportunity to ask you the question, or to answer the question rather, that I like to ask most of our guests, if not all of our guests. If you were to meet Shaundra 20 years ago, 10, 20 years ago, what kind of words of wisdom would you have imparted onto her?
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. And I thought about it because you know, I don't know if I would have changed anything, to be honest. I definitely could have benefited from not having the math phobia, that's for sure, in a lot of areas. I think the math phobia held me back from graduating with my bachelor's a lot earlier, and that probably had an impact on my entire career. But in the end, the way that I ended up adopting a lot of the math principles that are relative to what I'm working on, um, they're they're more meaningful because of the route that I took, right? To this day, I still won't go and pick up a math book, but I do like to look at something that talks about physics that maybe doesn't include the math, and it's fascinating. And I'm still very curious. So I don't know if I would have changed anything. I think if I had to give some advice to somebody today, I obviously would say let's focus on the ethics part of things, focus on the the research for user experience, because I think that's a big piece of where you know being able to shape the future. I mean, we look at this future that's full of AI and full of big data, and looking at how that's all going to play out into our future world. And I've got to hope that that's going to be way more human centered and a better human experience across the board. So I would have to say, if I had to give a young person advice today, I'd say go back and look at things like user experience, because it's really important. But in terms of my journey, yeah, I don't know, math phobia might have been the one.
And that's okay, right? I mean, it hasn't I think you smile now when you talk about it, which I
Yeah,
think is kind of, I don't know.
it forced me to learn Excel. Right? Like, that's why
There
I
you
say I
go.
wouldn't change it, because it forced me to learn Excel in a way that I think most people don't even consider using
Mm-mm.
Excel. And that was invaluable, like so invaluable. And I was lucky in the professional services group that I worked with at Creo and Kodak. A lot of the color information was very visual, and one big aha moment for me on that was understanding that data doesn't really mean much unless you can visualize it, unless data becomes information when it's visualized. And so I had a really great mentor back in the day. His name's Dave Williams. And he used to study a lot of Tufte, who did a lot of work on infographics and making sure that you could really understand data succinctly, right? I mean, that's the beauty of understanding something deeply, is being able to describe it very simply and quickly. And so didn't just learn Excel in the traditional sense of writing, but it was also the graphing. It was the charts and the graphing that made such a huge difference. And I look at what we can do today with Tableau and or CRM. It just kind of blows your mind what we can do with some of those things today. So um, I don't know that journey would have been all that different if I had studied math. I might not have gotten into Excel as much as I did. So who knows, right? I'm not a big fan of looking back and regretting things, because it's always just something to learn from.
Exactly. It's not necessarily regret. It's always a way to reassess the current situation, right? Or I don't know, consider those things now, right?
Yeah.
And look forward looking. Um, well, Shaundra, it has been a pleasure. You have lived, I think, about 5 lives, which is just exciting. Um, so all of us to listen in and learn from you on all your words of wisdom, and all your key
Mhm.
themes. So it has been, and I say this from my heart, it's been a pleasure really having you on the podcast. So I thank you for your time.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. That was really a lot of fun to do, and I appreciate the time.
At STEM we are working towards making all STEM careers achievable regardless of your identity, background, or even access to resources. Here at STEM we will introduce you to all things STEM, whether they be careers, research, tips and tricks, and even inspiration. Thanks all for watching and learning with us today. And don't forget to ask yourselves, where does your journey stem from? Thanks, guys.